Hi y'all, this is Maria Clark at Sweet Willow Designs and welcome to my studio. Today we're going to work on this pretty Christmas bottle. Let's go ahead and get started. For the tools and materials, I will be using the DecoArt Americana paint, and I'll be using True Red, White, Cranberry Wine, Celery Green, Hauser Dark Green, and the Dazzling Metallics Gold in Splendid Gold. I'll also be using the DecoArt Chalk Paint background. Now, this is a plastic bottle that I'm painting on, so I think you might want to consider using a multi-surface paint. I am putting a varnish over this, but I do think multi-surface would be a good choice as well, at least for the background paint. And the Duraclear satin varnish. I'll be using my regular set of dotting tools. And I'm going to be using this Califia Farms Almond Milk bottle. I love the shape of this bottle. And as an option, I'll be using a couple of wood pieces to create a finial, a little wood button, and a little bead, wood bead that I just found at in the craft section, the wood craft section. So let's go ahead and get started with this project. Now, I have this bottle from Califia Farms. So, of course, we use this in our household, this almond milk. And I just love the shape of this bottle. I think it's absolutely beautiful. And I thought it would be really fun to paint on. So this is kind of neat because this is recyclable packaging material. So it has this little zipper here to just pull off that top cover, the product information cover, and it just zips right off. They've made it really easy for us to recycle, and so we're going to use this bottle. I think that is just a beautiful shape, and I just absolutely love it. I thought this would make a really nice project. Now, if you don't have this bottle, of course, consider a wine bottle or something else that you might have. So here it is with my base coat of paint. Isn't that pretty? Even just itself, I think that's nice. And I'm going to go ahead and use this. And I'm going to do a little something special to the cap as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started with this. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is to put some marks on this. So I've measured it, and I'm just going to mark out where I want, just for certain reference, I'll be marking at various points. So look at the bottle that you have, and the first thing is to decide how far down the bottle you want your design to go. Maybe you'll fill the entire bottle. In my case, I'm going to leave some black at the very bottom for contrast. So I've measured it out, and now I'm just going to go ahead and draw my reference marks. So I've got these little bottles here that I'm going to just stack up until I get to the height that I'm looking for, and I'll use my pencil and just rotate that around so that I get a mark. And then I'll put actually 3 marks, because in this particular design I'm going to be using 3 different kind of rows. Now, I am going for a Christmas look in this, so I'm actually doing a poinsettia. And so I want to have 3 rows, 2 of the red and then 1 for the green. So I'm just going to go ahead and mark. You just mark however far down you want your design to travel. Okay, the next thing to do is just measure the circumference of your bottle. Now keep in mind that these are not precise measurements, right? We're just kind of making ourselves a little guide. And I'm going to draw the poinsettia leaf. So I've measured out how the circumference of my bottle, and I'm going to divide it into 5 segments in this case. You can use as many segments as you like. And then I'm just going to kind of freehand cut myself a little shape here. That I can use. Now, if you have my mandala shape stencils, you could use one of the shapes, just draw it out. I think on a piece of paper would be best for this because there's a little bit of flexibility. And then I'll cut off any of the excess paper, and I will use those the marks that I drew around the circumference of the bottle to give me some guides. So I'll place the tip of my template at each one of those lines. So here it is. I'm just applying it to the bottle, and I'm using my ceramic pencil, and I'm just going to trace around that. You can see my marks a little bit. I'm just kind of measuring now at the bottom, and what I'll actually have to do is use two measurements because that bottom, as it goes down the bottom of the bottle, it widens, so I want to go ahead and put another one. So I just use the other to sort of trace the shape so I get the same shape. And I'll just cut that out so that's a little bit larger. And again, you're just kind of using the bottle shape that you have to come up with these little templates. And you can see that one's quite a bit larger. I'll place it on there just to sort of dry fit it. I cut it down a little bit so I didn't have all that excess paper, and then I'll just go ahead and draw this on. And I'm just positioning it where I think it looks best. And I'll do that all the way around the bottle. So I end up having 3 rows of these petal shapes. And here's a little look at that. The lines are a little bit faint, but I think you can see that okay, of how I just place those templates. All right, so my idea on this is to have a lighter color at the top and then go into a dark, a light pink, a dark red, and then a green. So I'm just mixing up some paint. I have the true red and some white, and I'm just mixing it until I get a color that is pleasing to me. And I'll go ahead and start to coat this bottle. Now I'm using a wide, this is I think it's a filbert brush, and I'm just filling in the basic part of the pattern that I created. Now one thing I want to mention, this is going to take several coats, and in the end I actually, it's not completely coated. I left a little bit of the background, the black, showing through a little bit just for interest's sake, but you could paint it fully if you wanted to. So I've put one coat of the pink color that I mixed up, and now I'm putting just the true red on, and you see I'm changing out the size of the brushes that I'm using so that I can get into those points, and this is just getting my first coat down. And I'll do that all the way around. And now I'm coming in with the green. This is the celery green. Just painting a background. Now on this last row of green, I thought actually needed to widen the petal just a little bit. Looked a little better to me, so just add some additional paint to widen it up. And here I am just showing you the bottle now. It's been painted with several coats. I think I ended up with 3 coats of the base painting here. And I think that looks good. Now I'm ready to start dotting, and what I'm going to do is draw some lines up from each one of those petals up to the top of the bottle, because I'm going to be adding some additional dotting up there. So I'm just making myself some reference and drawing them. And I'm just freehanding these. I just kind of made marks up from the petal, and then I'm able to draw to have those lines meet. Okay, and that's how that's looking. That looks good. All right, I'm ready to start dotting, and I'm using the cranberry wine, and I'm going to start dotting these lines. I'm using my G6 4mm, so I get a consistent size, and I'm going to dot up each one of those lines that I drew. Just up to the rim of that bottle. And I did that all the way around. Now I'm starting at the bottom or the tip of these petals. I'm using my K10.5, 6.5 millimeter, and still with the cranberry wine. And I'm going to follow that up with the H8 5 millimeter to make a little smaller dot. And then I'll use the G6 4 millimeter for 3 dots, and then I'm going to use the end of the opposite end, the rounded end of my G6 4 millimeter to place my dots here. And when I first did this, you'll see that I'm walking the dots. In the end, I decided they fade away a little too much, so I decided to use the same size dots. So when we see the next little section here, you'll see that I continue to dip my tool into the paint to get a same size dot, so that I'm not decreasing the size of those dots as I go up to meet that next point. So this is walking the dots. And I just thought, yeah, again, it just faded away just a little too much. And then at the bottom, I'll put a little crown here, 3 dots. And that's moving down into that green section. And I'll walk the dots around that bottom dot. Again, I'm just using the rounded end of my crochet hook. You could use nail dotters or whatever other tools you have. And one little single dot there to finish that up. All right, let's look at this one more time. So starting with my K10.5, 6.5, and then my H8 5 millimeter, my G6 4 millimeter, and then the end of that. And you'll see that on this one, I'm not walking the dots. I'm dipping it each time to create the same size dots. And I just went back over the previous section there to get those to be the same size. And then I'll finish this one up with a crown and walk the dots around. All right. Now I'm going to add a little centerpiece to each one of these top petals. So I'm just using my ceramic pencil and I'm marking the center. I find that it is helpful to mark the center. Now, see that I'm not using a measuring tool or anything. I've let this paint dry, so I have a little flexibility here, so I'm not disturbing the paint. And I'm just finding the center. Okay, finish that up. And now I've got my center marks. Now I'm still using the cranberry wine, and I'm using my P16 11.5 millimeter to put a large dot there at my center point marks. Now, one thing I want to just reinforce here is that you've seen when I've done some of the Christmas ornaments that I've given you a tip to use some medium, gel medium, to thicken up your paint a little bit so that it doesn't droop. There's a couple things you can do. You can use the gel medium, which is actually probably the best option, and that gives you a little thicker paint. Or you can change the orientation of the bottle, right? So you stand it up and then turn it over so it's standing on the other end, and that kind of helps the paint settle into the middle. This does also have a curved surface, so when you're choosing the size of tool that you want to use, you want to keep in mind how it reacts on the curve. See how where I'm doing this now, there's a little bit of a curve. Now I'm just placing a dot of crowns, 3 crowns at the north, south, east, west orientation of this main dot. I'm using the rounded end of my K 10.5, 6.5 millimeter to get a little larger dot. I have a little boo-boo there, so just use my cotton swab to clean that up. And changing the orientation of the bottle as I need to. Now, I did let this dry at various points because as I turn that bottle around, I don't want to disturb the paint. So I do have some dry time in the sequence of painting. So I've got my north, south, east, west crowns. I'll just place a few little dots there to join those crowns together. Using a very small nail dotter. And I get this kind of diamond design. Small dot at the top of each one of those crowns. Okay, we'll do that one more time. You can see you've got a good view here of how the paint is not completely covering up all of that black. That's just a preference. I like the little bit of that texture showing through, but you may choose to have it more solidly painted. That's just an extra coat of paint. Okay, now I'm going to start my next row just to add more painting in this section of the petal. And the lighter color that I'm using here is the cranberry wine with some white. And I noticed that it had a really purple undertone here. So this is going to read a little bit purple. These dots at the tip of this petal are with my G6 4 millimeter. And then I'm using the rounded end of my K 10.5, 6.5 to walk those dots up, and see how using the other end of that tool gives you a little more option here in terms of the size of the dots. I don't have a dotting tool that's that large, so it's nice to be able to use these. All right, now I've lightened up that same color, so this is the cranberry wine with white, and it's just a little lighter shade. Again, starting with my G6 4 millimeter and then using the rounded end of my K 10.5, 6.5 millimeter to walk the dots up. All right, now I'm going to add another curved element. So what I'm doing is from the painted element, that little diamond there, I'm finding the center point between that and the top edge of the bottle. And then I'm just freehanding a curve. So it's kind of like an X curve, if that makes sense, if you can see that here. And I'm just freehanding it. I didn't use a template or anything. There, so I've got a little curve, and I'll do that all the way around. And you get a look at that. So using my mid color here, my cranberry wine with a little bit of white, I use my G6, or I'm sorry, my H8 5mm to place a dot in the center. And then I'm using a medium-sized dotting tool to just put consistent sized dots on that line that I've drawn. And that's going to give me that little X pattern. I have to count how many I had to try to keep consistent. Now don't fret if you're not, because sometimes I have to drop or add an extra dot just based on my spacing. I'm making this pattern up as I go, so it doesn't always work out perfectly. Let's take a little closer look at that. And then one thing I wanted to mention on this, as I get close to the end there of the X shape, I am walking just a couple dots to meet up. I'm finding that resting my bottle on this is a little plastic container, is helpful so it's not hitting the table. But you know, you want to be careful because it can roll around a little bit. But here's a good look at this. Consistent size until I get to the very end there. And then just walk a few. And here it is all the way around. Let's take a look at our progress so far. So I intended to do a poinsettia Christmas bottle. This is not reading Christmas to me. I don't know, does it read it to you? I think it's that pink and the cranberry wine. It's still very pretty, but I'm not sure it's exactly Christmas. So, you know, we'll keep working on this. All right, so the next section, I've already dotted it once, so you can take a look at it before we get started. But I'm going to fill in with this pattern, and you can get a little closer look at it here, because in addition to my regular dotting tools, I'm going to be using the end of an eraser cap, or the eraser cap, to get these little oval type dots. So let's go ahead and paint that section. Starting at the corner, I used my H8 5mm to place my main dot. And then my G6 4mm. To bring down 2 dots, and then the rounded end of my K 10.5 6.5mm to put a couple of the same size and then walk some down, walk the dots down. I'm using my P16 11.5mm to place a dot in that little crevice. Now I've dropped it down a little bit below the V there, and now I'm using my eraser, and I'll put 5 petals, or yeah, 5. I've got 5 here. All right, now I'm starting at the tip, and I'll follow the same kind of repetition for each of these rows. I'm using the K10.5, 6.5 millimeter for the large dot. Then I moved down to the H8 5 millimeter to start to decrease the size. And then my G6 4 millimeter. And then again, the rounded end of my K10.5, 6.5. Now, some of you may have a set of dotting tools that have the larger balls on the stylus, and that would be perfect for this. I do have some of those, and I'll show you at some point using them. And then again, the crown, just repeating that pattern with the crown. I've just used a larger set of tools to get a little bigger crown. All right, now on this one, I lost some of the footage for some reason. So I'm going to zoom in here and let you look at this pattern. I put a large dot there with my P16 11.5, and I did the same size dots all the way around it. And then sort of followed the same kind of dotting pattern from the top there. From the previous row, you have that cranberry wine that's sort of spilling into the green a little bit. I used my H8 5 millimeter to put a couple of dots, and then I walked some dots down with my the rounded end of my K10.5, 6.5 millimeter. I hope you're following that okay. And then at the very bottom, I did the same pattern. I used the larger dot at the tip as my K10.5, 6.5 millimeter, and then my H8. So it follows the same pattern as the red row above it. And I'm sorry about that. So now I'm going to start mixing up a little bit of paint, and I'm going to come in similar to how I did with the rows above. I go from dark to a medium and then to a lighter. So on this red row, I've mixed up a little bit more paint. This one has, this row or this color has a little bit more red in it, so it's a little bit darker than that pink. And I'm just following the same pattern. And I've put a row of slightly darker. Now I'm going down into the green. And on this one, the color is a combination of the celery green and the Hauser dark green. So I just mixed those until I got a deeper color. I didn't want it overly dark, but I did want to be able to see it. So I've got a sort of medium green here. And I'm using my K10.5, 6.5 millimeter for the larger dot in the corner, and then my H8 5 millimeter. You'll have to check the size of tools based on the spacing that you have to see whether you need to go smaller. And then my G6 4 millimeter to start decreasing that a little more. And then the rounded end of my K10.5, 6.5 to meet those two lines. Now I've gone to a smaller nail dotter to fill in a little bit here. I've mixed up another color just by adding a little bit of white, a little bit more white. And I used my H8 5 millimeter and then my G6 4 millimeter. And then a nail dotter to walk a few dots to complete that line. And I did that all the way around the bottle. So this represents the primary dotting. Let's take a look at that. I think that looks great. I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to set that aside to dry. All right, I'll set that aside to dry, and I'm going to start doing my top dotting. And I'm going to be using the Dazzling Metallics Splendid Gold. This is the DecoArt Americana Dazzling Metallics. And I'll just find another smaller size tool to go and fit. All right, so I'm going in with the gold. I think that looks pretty. And I'm going to use gold to just top dot a good number of the dots that I've placed already. And don't forget, of course, this is completely dry. So just choosing a smaller size tool, I'll just do my series of top dots. The depth and dimension that are added by the top dots is really astounding. It's just so pretty. Now this is a lot of top dotting. I actually dotted almost every dot that I'd placed down as my base coat. And, you know, of course, add as much or as little as you like. Okay, I finished all the green. Now I'm ready to move into the red section. Same thing, top dotting with the Dazzling Metallics Splendid Gold. Okay, here's all of the top dotting. Now I want to stop here because I didn't think I needed to actually film all of my top dotting, but notice on that section that has the pink, I have top dotted on all those little cranberry wine dots. You can see on the little medallion, and then on the outside edge. I didn't do these little inside lighter colors that I placed in. I didn't top dot those. I wanted those to kind of recede a little bit. And then I've placed gold then on all the cranberry wine dots around that sort of outline. I went back in and I added another row of top dotting on the main center dots in the color, the base color, and then dropped a little bit of gold on that. Now I wanted to talk about this cap because I'm going to do add something to this cap. I'm going to make a little finial for the top, and I just have these little wood pieces from my various craft projects, and this is a little flat button type wood piece, and then a flat bead type, and I'm going to glue those two together to make a little finial. Now this is completely optional. I just wanted to get a little extra height and a little kind of additional element to the top of that bottle. You could leave it just how it is and it's absolutely beautiful, but I wanted to add this. I've painted it black, and then I'm just going to glue it to the top, and see how that adds just another little extra something. I'm not going to show you the actual painting. Let me just show you what this looks like, though, for this cap. I made some larger dots using the same colors in the base of the bottle, and just dotted around the top of that finial and around the base of that cap. And I do think that looks really pretty. So here's actually my completed bottle. There are 3 coats of the DecoArt satin varnish on the cap and the base of the bottle. Let's take a closer look at the whole project. And there's the top of the finial. Again, it would be very pretty just to dot the cap. There's a little look at the cap itself. And as we move down, doesn't that sheen look so pretty with that varnish on there? I love it. So there's a lot of dimension and interest in this piece. And again, my intent was to have a Christmas bottle. You could use a wine bottle or anything else that you might have that you would enjoy painting on. I want to thank you for joining me in my studio today. I hope you enjoyed this project. I'd love it if you'd subscribe or leave me a comment. Like this video if you enjoyed it. And I enjoy talking with you through the comments and having you participate in the painting experience with me. Thanks so much for joining me in my studio. Take care.